Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Inner Sanctum YouTube channel. I'm your host, Ari Stamatakos, and today we're back with a slightly different video. Now, with the A-League men's season only a matter of days away, kicking off on the 7th of October in a grand final rematch between Melbourne City and Western United, let's take a look forward into the new A-League men's season and take a look at three things that everyone should be excited for. Now, this video taking inspiration from Gerald Lynch's piece for the Inner Sanctum, I should say, which was released a couple of weeks ago. That will be linked in the description as well as on the Inner Sanctum YouTube channel. But let's get into it. Let's look at 3 points that I've taken from that piece and let's delve a little bit deeper into those as to why everyone can be excited for this new A-League men's season. Now, the first point we're going to be looking at is the arrival of Luis Nani to Melbourne Victory. Now, while we'll speak about Luis Nani and his footballing ability as well a little bit later, what this signing represents, I feel like, is a little bit more important to the grand scheme of the A-League. Now, you can say this with Charlie Austin as well, who has come from England to Brisbane Roar and has already started pretty well in a couple of the Australia Cup games that he has played. But what Luis Nani represents, and I think you can also say this about Charlie Austin, is it represents the A-League and Australian football attracting high quality players whilst not at their peak, but certainly not a couple of years out from them retiring. Now, Luis Nani was playing in the first division of Italy last season. He didn't play a whole lot, playing for Venezia in Serie A, but he did feature 10 times for them last season. And Charlie Austin, of course, was playing in the second division of England, I do believe. So these players who have big names, who obviously have incredible talent, coming to the A-League when they're still capable of playing pretty good football and still capable of influencing teams is a big it was a massive sign and a big asset for the A-League to have. Now, another thing that Luis Nani, potentially more than Charlie Austin, holds is that name value. Now, we all know Australia is filled with fans that follow the European leagues, the Premier League especially, and Luis Nani is definitely one of those players that you kind of stigmatise or you kind of relate to the Manchester United team of the early 2010s and these teams that so many kids in Australia look up to and watch and idolise these players. And for Nani to come to the A-League and to show his talents in Australia for everyone here that watched him when he was playing for Manchester United, for him to do it in Australia is a massive thing for people in this country to get involved and to get invested in the game. So many people who wanted to see Nani play when he was at Manchester United can actually do it now while he's at Melbourne Victory and can do it and support the local football here and support Melbourne Victory and get around football in this country. Similar things can be said about Charlie Austin, while it's not overly similar. There's still the idea of a big profile name or a high profile name coming to the A-League that has played in the Premier League, that has played in high divisions, especially in England, which a lot of people in this country watch, especially the English Premier League. That idea of those players coming to the A-League whilst they're still capable of playing pretty good football is massive for the A-League and massive for football in this country in general. Now, whilst we've spoken about the brand that Nani and Austin can offer, what they can offer on the pitch is potentially even better. Now, for the longest time, those who have been critical of the A-League have kind of shown that, or have kind of said that it lacks quality in terms of the individual quality and the players aren't that good. I think you can kind of dismiss that straight away with Luis Nani, because we've seen already in the glimpses that he's had so far in the pre-seasons for Melbourne Victory and also Charlie Austin in the Australia Cup for Brisbane Roar, that these guys are still really good and can really add some spark into the A-League and can add that bit of quality that all the critics say that this league is missing. Nani especially is probably the best quality signing the A-League has had since Del Piero, and if he can produce half of what Del Piero did for Sydney FC, I think that's going to be a fantastic output for not only Nani, not only for Melbourne Victory, but I think for the league as well, because whilst you can speak about it from a Melbourne Victory perspective and whilst you can speak about it from a Brisbane Roar perspective if you want to speak about Charlie Austin, what these players offer in terms of just a holistic view of the A-League is probably far greater than what they offer in terms of their own team and personal success. And I think the last thing that you can kind of speak about Luis Nani and Charlie Austin as well to an extent is the storylines that they create. I think this kind of revolves around Nani a little bit more, but the storyline around Nani and the narrative around him this season will be probably the best thing for the A-League. It's going to put a lot of eyes on Melbourne Victory games. It's going to put a lot of eyes on the big games, like the Big Blues. Obviously, the Big Blue kicks off both Melbourne Victory and Sydney FC's season this year, but as well as the Melbourne Derby, the Big Blues, and obviously the original Derby. What will Nani do in these big games? Can Nani become the A-League's best ever player? What type of output can he produce? We already saw in his cameo in the Australia Cup, that he's able to dictate play still, can drop deep, collect the ball, but can also be an influence in the final third. So can he just be this ridiculous player that doubles any numbers, any sort of numbers that we've seen? We saw obviously Kazuke Honda when he was at Melbourne Victory produced outstanding numbers before he got injured. Will that be similar for Nani? Can he lead Victory back to where Victory want to be? They've had a couple of years in positions where they wouldn't want to be. Last year under Tony Popovich was a little bit of a progression season. Is Nani that little bit of that cherry on top, in a sense, to just add that final layer of class, that final layer of polish to this Victory team that can lead them to another premiership? And I think this also comes down to who can stop him and who can stop this Melbourne Victory team with Nani in it. I think this kind of would go for any other team. The spotlight will automatically be on Melbourne Victory pretty much every weekend, because they want to see what Nani can produce. Similarly to what it was when Del Piero was at Sydney FC. Who can stop Del Piero? Who can overthrow or dethrone this Sydney FC team, in a sense? So these narratives, these storylines that will come from these big name signings are just going to put more eyes on the league, are just going to create more excitement and more buzz around the league, and it's just going to create for incredible entertainment, incredible viewing, and hopefully these storylines can play out. Hopefully we can see Nani late on in the season in finals and coming up against Melbourne City, in the Big Blue, the original rivalry, and other big games, just to see what he's truly made of. But that is probably the main thing that we are expecting and what we're looking forward to heading into the new season for the A-League men's. So we've just spoken about the likes of Lewis Nani and Charlie Austin, what these imports can bring to the game. But let's also take a look at the local talent that we already have in Australia. Now, obviously, this is a World Cup year. In November, the Socceroos will be heading to Qatar to versus Denmark, France and Tunisia in the hopes of doing something and creating something special for this nation that has had so much heartbreak in World Cups in recent times. But what we are looking for in this A-League season, especially at the start, now, the players that will be playing will only have a couple of months, a couple of games even, to really prove themselves and to prove themselves to Graham Arnold. But these young Aussies making their World Cup claims is probably something, especially in the early parts of the season, that everyone's going to be excited for. The likes of Marco Tilio, who has torn it up for Melbourne City, has already made a couple of appearances for the Socceroos and all the Olyroos as well in particular. These players, these young players who are on the fringes of the squad, we've obviously covered a couple of those players in the Player Spotlight series, which is on the YouTube channel as well. But what these young players can offer can provide a bit of spark for their teams to make their claim for the World Cup. Just adds way more excitement. You have the likes of Nick D'Agostino as well, who had a season or a career best season last year for Melbourne Victory. He could explode onto the scene, potentially playing as a number one striker for Melbourne Victory this season, with the service of the likes of Lewis Nani, who we've just spoken about. Maybe he can stake his claim for a World Cup place, being that like 22nd man into the squad, and really just being a bolter in a sense. And you have the likes of Jake Brimmer, who we've covered on Player Spotlight as well. He's another player who had a career best season for Melbourne Victory last season. And then you have the likes of Daniel Arzani, who has been maybe not much maligned, but has obviously killed it for Melbourne City back in the day. It seems ages ago that he was tearing it up for Melbourne City, but he's gone overseas, had some unlucky form with injuries and form as well. Hasn't really gone his way, but he's back at Macarthur this year, and we've seen already in the Australia Cup just how good he can be. I think we're all reminded, especially in the Australia Cup final, just how good he can be with the ball at his feet. Technically, he's probably one of the best players in the league in terms of technical ability. His dribbling ability is just phenomenal, and he could potentially make his claim to go on the plane in Qatar. We all saw what he did in Russia back in 2018. He was probably one of Australia's better players in his cameo appearances that he did make. But him and Tilio, Arzani and Tilio, these two exciting wingers to stake their claim for the World Cup will be a very exciting narrative heading into the start of the season. And then you have Graham Cole, who has obviously made his move to Newcastle United in England. That is just phenomenal, especially from his story, from his background, where he's come from. He's a true inspiration to so many people in this country, and he will be at Central Coast for the time being. His move to England officially activates in January, so he will spend the first half of the season at Central Coast, and what he can do in this first couple of months will be something special. I can guarantee that, because we all saw what he did off the bench for Central Coast in the latter parts of last season. Hopefully this year he can get a couple of starts under his belt, and maybe he can just continue that form from what he had last year and force Graham Arnold to pick him. That would just be a truly incredible story. We all saw what he did against Barcelona for the A-League All-Stars. We all saw what he's done for the Socceroos, especially against New Zealand. So Graham Cole is potentially one of the biggest storylines heading into the A-League season, but I think this kind of typifies and is a bit of a microcosm for all these young Aussie talent that exploded onto the scene last year, but have been hiding under the radar. To see what they can do in the first couple of games of the season to stake their claim for the World Cup will be probably the most exciting narrative heading into the season, because you have all these players playing for big teams, playing for teams with high expectations. If they can produce something that can show their class in a sense and can produce something that will force Graham Arnold's hand to pick him in the squad, then it will just create so much buzz around the league, because you have these fantastic players who are dominating at A-League level. So what can they do for the national team? What can they do in Qatar? What can they do against the likes of France and Denmark and Tunisia as well? So it's going to be fantastic to see. I can't wait to see all these young talent explode onto the scene. I feel like it's going to be a fantastic start to the season for some of these players who are going to stake their claims for the World Cup. It's almost a do or die in a sense. If you think you're on the periphery of the squad, if you're you're the 26th, 25th man, you might not make the plane. You have 4 or 5 games of the season to really prove yourself and to really show your class and to force Graham Arnold's hand. So it's going to be very, very exciting to see. So the final thing we're going to be speaking about in this video is the vibe around the A-League. I feel like that's a little bit of a vague term in a sense, but if you look at the active support that the A-League got last season, you look at the hype around especially the finals last season, couple this with the World Cup, couple this with the likes of Graham Cole and Nani that we've spoken about, I just feel like the vibe around the A-League this season and the vibe around this competition is slowly starting to pick up steam, and I think this is going to be driven by the active support. Now, we saw last season the return of the active support in a little bit of a sense. We obviously know that it was in its peak maybe in 2015, 2014. That's probably when the active support was really at its best and really thriving. It has quieted down over the last couple of years, and obviously COVID has affected active support and just attendances in general. But now, hopefully, as we're slowly starting to fade out of that era, if you want to call it that. And we saw last season that Melbourne Victory got the active support back up and running. The RBB was back up and running as well. And you have these sides who are now building fan bases and are building kind of culture around their clubs. We obviously saw Western United getting their first premiership. So hopefully they can draw a few more numbers in terms of their active support, but attendances in general. I feel like they're going to be the driving force for the energy and for the vibes and for the excitement around the league this season, because when you watch the A-League and when you go to the A-League games, it's almost an accessory that it is a must-have, especially when you go and watch football games. The active support, the noise, the chants, the excitement that those active supporters and those hardcore supporters bring to the games, it's almost more enthralling than the game itself in a sense. You do catch yourself just watching the Melbourne Victory Terrace or the RBB or the Cove when they're up and running, when they're in full voice, when they're really passionate, and when they are shown up in numbers. That is probably one of the best things about this league, because we have such a passionate fan base of football. It has dwindled down a little bit, but I feel like if once one club starts to do it, another club will join on, and another club will join on, and they are the catalyst for. They're the catalyst, the active support of the catalyst to bringing everything out of the A-League, bringing everyone out of their shell, and getting the active support and getting the attendances and getting the viewing figures and getting the just total vibes and excitement and energy back into the A-League from what it was maybe 10 or so years ago to what it is now. It's a pretty big difference. So hopefully now these active supporters who came about last season, who resurfaced themselves, hopefully they can really show what they're made of and really show just how passionate they are about the league, which will then create so much excitement, so much buzz, so much energy, and it just creates so much wanting to watch it. It's almost hard to describe, but when there's active support up and about, and when people are invested, and when there's 30,000-40,000 heading to big games, packed out Amy Park, I should say, packed out Sydney Football Stadium, packed out Bankwest Stadium. These it almost makes you watch. It's almost you can't take your eyes off it because the noise just seeps through the TV. When you're at the games, you always have your eyes peeling towards the active support because they're just so vibrant. The colors, the chants, the limbs, in a sense. We all saw there's obviously that famous footage going around of Nick D'Agostino's equaliser in the first Melbourne derby last season. That massive shot of the north end at Amy Park going absolutely ballistic when that goal goes in. We want to see that in every stadium in the country. We want to see that for every goal in the country because that will just create so much hype around the league, and it will mask anything any critics want to say about the quality because people care. And that's the main thing that people need to realize about football in this country is that when more people care about it, when more people are invested about it, it doesn't matter about the quality on the pitch. It doesn't matter about a lot of other things because people care about the football and people care about the players, people care about the storylines and their clubs. So everything will skyrocket from there. So I feel like it's a big year for active support. It's a big year for attendances and TV numbers in general to really drive the excitement, drive the vibes and drive the energy for this league because we've just spoken about the players and we've spoken about the narratives. Now it's time for the people to get on board, the people to get invested, and then this league will skyrocket, no doubt. So yes, that is all. Thank you very much for watching this video on the Inner Sanctum YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe and like the video. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Leave your thoughts about what you're most excited for heading into the 2022-2023 A-League men's season. Make sure you check out Gerald Lynch's piece in the link in the description box below, as well as it's up on the Inner Sanctum website as well. Make sure you subscribe once again. Thank you all very much for watching. See you guys next time and goodbye.